I'm going to give you a quick, brief introduction to online privacy and security, just with the goal of giving you some things to act on or even things to look up later. But we're going to go pretty quick through stuff, again, just to give you an introduction to things that are possible or things to watch out for. So first I wanted to tell you about where I'm coming from. I'm from a group called the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We're a nonprofit just a couple blocks that way. And we're kind of a watchdog or user advocate organization fighting for users' rights online, fighting for privacy, security, freedom of speech. So with that, the things I'm going to go over today, a brief introduction to a thing called threat modeling, which is one way to help answer the question of like, okay, I want to protect my privacy and security online, what do I do? And I'll take you through a process called threat modeling to answer that question in more detail for your own individual specific situation. Second, I'll go over a few things to watch out for online, kind of typical scams or threats that any internet user could come across and kind of fall for. And then third, kind of having talked about a security mindset and how we want to think about our risk, having talked about things to look out for online, I'll tell you some steps you can take right now. Some will be really simple, some will involve downloading something, some you might want to look into later or contact me later, but I'll try to give you a good idea of some relatively quick, easy steps that most people can benefit from. But first, before we go into these topics, I wanted to start with this very important statement. There is no such thing as perfect security or perfect privacy. It simply does not exist. And I have a picture here of a door lock because we accept this in a lot of areas of our lives. Like, I'm sure a lot of us have locks just like this on our homes. They are not perfectly secure. Someone could break them, someone could hack through them, someone could steal the key, but we accept this level of security. This is reasonable. It's better than a door with no lock. And for our needs or for the value of the things that are in our homes, this works. So as we're going through different security tips, I want you to keep this in mind. Like, we're not going for perfect security because there's just no such thing. Given the right amount of time, resources, cleverness, and motivation, anything can be hacked. But we're going for just kind of like door lock security, a reasonable thing that we can handle, that's not overly expensive, that's going to give us a lot of protection. So first, with that in mind, we'll start with a short introduction to this thing called threat modeling, which basically means risk assessment. When it comes to security and privacy advice for being online, there's really no one-size-fits-all approach. There's very little advice I could give to everyone in this room that would make sense for everybody. Instead, it makes a lot more sense to tell you about this continual process of asking questions and thinking about risks and creating what we call a model of what you want to protect and how. And this is one way to adopt what we call a security mindset, to look at your browsing and your online activities with security and privacy more in mind. So threat modeling questions, there are 5 main ones, and here they are. So first we ask, what do I want to protect? What's the information? What's the document or the file? What's the thing that I'm trying to protect? Second, who am I protecting it from? Who are my potential adversaries? Who are the people or entities I might be worried about? Third, we ask more about those people you want to protect it from. What skills, what resources or motivations do they have? You know, what kind of strategies are we protecting against? And then kind of to tamp down any paranoia at that point, we really assess the risk. We ask, how likely is it that this person or entity I'm worried about is going to come after the thing I want to protect? And what are the consequences if they do? And with that, knowing more about what exactly we're interested in protecting and what might be up against it, then we can ask the question of how do I protect my security online? What kind of time and energy and resources am I willing to put in to prevent any kind of compromise? And that's when we get to that door lock security. Like, what's the reasonable thing I can do that's feasible and effective and will fit into my lifestyle, honestly? So I'll go through these questions in turn and give some examples to make this a little more concrete. So when we're asking the question, what do I want to protect? This can vary for a lot of people, but there's some things that tend to be common. One is just passwords and credentials, your logins to get into different websites. One is your communications, your texts, your emails, different video or audio calls, any kind of messages you're exchanging with other people that you might want to keep private. Another is media, photo or video files. And then we might get into more specific information, sensitive financial information, health information, anything about religious affiliation or habits, and for a lot of different professions, there's a lot of things to consider. For lawyers, journalists, for government employees who might have government information on their devices, for doctors. And then I end with this kind of anything at all point, because this varies for everyone. And it doesn't have to be, sensitive or personal information for it to be something you want to protect. Privacy is a human right, and everyone has a right to it, and seeking it doesn't mean you have something sensitive or personal to hide. So this list can change for everyone, but I really encourage you to think about what is it that I necessarily want to protect. It could be, as specific and personal as financial or health information. It could be something seemingly as broad as your browsing habits, what websites you visit online. So this is the first thing you want to think about to kind of make that question, how can I protect myself online, much more concrete. So having thought about that, the thing you want to protect, who do you want to protect it from? Who might want it and why? And this can completely range for everyone's situation. That second point of advertisers and third parties might apply to almost anyone who uses the internet. There's a lot of advertisers, third parties, internet companies and service providers that are very interested in your browsing habits or browsing history to monetize that, and that might not be something you're comfortable with. Law enforcement and the government can absolutely seek certain information, often by serving companies like Google or Facebook with a warrant or subpoena to search for information from users. And this can also apply to peers, just to people in one's life, to roommates, to parents, even to partners or friends, to caregivers, to people really in your sphere who we often don't think about as kind of like big, scary NSA adversaries. But still people with whom you might have boundaries and want to maintain your own personal privacy in different ways. And I list here at the very beginning, between you, me, and the NSA, to highlight that often when we talk about privacy and security, particularly after the Snowden leaks in 2013, we think again about these big, shadowy adversaries like the NSA. But again, sometimes that's not what you're worried about, and even though we think of the NSA as a very technical, sophisticated force, often it's not the sophisticated technical things you want to use to defend against that. It's calling your congressperson. So when we talk about defending your online privacy and security, it's not just about your device or about the things you download or the habits you have online. It's also, when we're talking about things like the NSA or law enforcement and the government, it's also advocating for law and policy change. And I won't go into that, but I just wanted to include that to highlight that this is often much broader than we think about, and there's ways to put your time and energy in for effective change in a lot of ways. So having thought about the range of people or entities in your life who might want certain information, you can ask more about them. What skills or resources or motivations do they have? What are you thinking about defending against? And there's a comic here talking about, in a cryptography nerd and a security nerd's imagination, maybe you have these two government agents trying to get into someone's laptop and they find that it's encrypted, which means it's very secure, and they're going to use $1 million supercomputer to crack it. But the encryption is too good and they can't get in. That's often what we think about, especially again after the NSA revelations, really focused on these technical, sophisticated methods. In reality, they would say something like, his laptop's encrypted, hit him with a $5 wrench until he tells us the password. I don't think anyone in this room is in danger of getting hit with a $5 wrench, but this is to highlight that often it's people who want to get information will use techniques that are just sophisticated enough. And these include things that are not very technical and far more social and focused on being clever and tricky. Things like phishing, sending you an email or message with a link that encourages you to put in login information. Or financial information. Things like malware, again, encouraging you to click on links that might infect your device with different kind of spying software. Dumpster diving, for financial information we might throw away. Our recycling or trash can hold a lot of sensitive financial or personal information. Role-playing, for example, pretending to be tech support, or pretending to be someone who can help you with your computer when in fact they're just after financial information. Or even things like shoulder surfing in a cafe or an airport. If someone wants your passport, you're typing it right in. So I encourage people to think often less about kind of sophisticated technical methods that are outside of a lot of our reaches. Instead thinking about these things that are very cheap, very easy, and very easy for anyone to fall for. We often say in security that the human is the weakest link in the security chain. like this comment kind of points out, it's really hard to get around sophisticated technical methods. It's easy to get around people. It's easy to trick people. So think about kind of the cheaper, simpler ways that people might get at your information and how you can defend against those. And I'll talk about that a bit more later. So then the fourth step is assessing the risks. And this can often help tamp down any paranoia. It can be kind of scary, honestly, to think about, who might be after this information and how might they get at it? What am I trying to protect? With this, you can think and kind of ground all those considerations in the actual risk. How likely is it that the information or device you're trying to protect will get compromised? And then what are the consequences if that happens? For some things, like for example, credit card information being stolen, those consequences can be pretty big. You could lose time and/or money, and it could be a huge pain. For other things, like a password getting compromised, again, you could lose control of an account or lose control of information. But maybe some of those things are more likely than others. And we try to think about the things that are most likely and that have the most common sense defenses. With this in mind, with what's likely and what we would care about happening, what are the reasonable things we can do? So that's the next question. What are you willing to do? Kind of thinking more about what you want to protect and how, and what the stakes are. What kind of time and resources are you willing to put in? And I think about this in two main ways. You have two main options that kind of interact. You can change your tools. You can switch to different services or platforms. You could use a more secure device. You could change the settings on your devices to kind of lock them down. And you could also change your behavior. And this often takes a lot more effort, a lot more trying to change and ingrain a new habit. But this is often a lot more effective too. Because again, talking about things like phishing and malware and those social attacks, there's not a lot of tools that can defend against those. But your own behavior, your own kind of critical eye when you're browsing the internet, that's what the real protection is. Or often you could have a mix of these two. You could change your behavior to use stronger, more random passwords, and you might also adopt new tools to do that, like a password manager. So this is one way, again, to make it a little more manageable to think about what are the things I want to do to protect my security. They tend to either fall into one of these categories of tools or behavior. With that, kind of very quick introduction, I encourage you to check out this website, ssd.eff.org. That's my organization, the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Surveillance Self-Defense Guide that goes into a lot more detail about threat modeling. It includes some examples for people like students or activists or journalists, kind of different profiles of people who might have different threat model considerations. And then it makes it really concrete with tutorials for using different secure messaging apps or different communication apps for secure deletion. It gives you a lot more detail. It's accessible to any skill level, and I really recommend checking it out and even just perusing it after this to kind of see what might appeal to you or just to get a better idea of what's out there. If you have any questions about that, also please feel free to talk to me after this or to email me as well. So these were the threat modeling questions we went over. Before I keep going, does anyone have any questions about this general concept and process?
Yes. How many years of analysis will it take to do a thorough job on this?
Forever, honestly. It's always changing, right? Your situation's always changing. The technology is always changing. I think it's not about getting to a final, having done a good job. It's just that this is a mindset that you adopt to think about this stuff in a new way. It's kind of a continual process, if that makes sense. Yeah?
I have a landline at home, and I noticed that I get a lot of calls from this apparently foreign office that is pretending to be part of AT&T and offering me tech support, and they call over and over and over again, and I just wonder why they're not smart enough to realize that, I'm not going to bite.
Well, we'll talk about that next, yeah.
Okay.
And my short answer is that they're smart enough to realize that a lot of other people will bite, and that the recipient on the other end of that phone might change. So they're very effective, and you are smart enough to not bite, but a lot of people do.
Are they after my credit card number? Is that the idea?
I can't be sure, but that is a reasonable assumption, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that a little more in the next section. Any more questions before we move on? Yeah, and please feel free to interrupt me at any point if a question comes up or something's unclear. So next, some things to watch out for. This is not a comprehensive or exhaustive list of things you might run into online, but these are some very common scams or threats that can be easy to recognize once you know what to look for. And the point kind of behind all these different things I'm going to talk about is that most modern hacking, quote unquote, requires your unknowing participation. It often requires you to click on something or you to download something. And the good news there is that that means it's avoidable and it's preventable. If we kind of develop different kinds of awareness to spot kind of the red flags for different kinds of scams. And the common thread among the things I'm going to talk about is that they're all trying to make you believe that what you're clicking on is something that it's not. They're trying to make you believe you're clicking on a legitimate login link, clicking on a real attachment, talking to a real AT&T support person, when in fact that's not the case. So we're looking at very clever, tricky ways to try to make you think you're clicking on something that you are not. And the three things I'm going to talk about are phishing and malware messages, which can include on the phone, kind of through email, text message, phone is where we see these things happening a lot. Tech support pop-ups that you might see on your device while you're browsing the internet. And even I include fake news, quote unquote, in this category. I'll talk about that a bit more. So first, phishing and malware messages. These can be emails, they can be texts, they can be phone calls, pretending to be often a large trusted entity like a bank, like Amazon, like Google, asking you to click on a link either to verify your identity because of fraud, to redeem a prize that you have won apparently. These are all, again, trying to make you click on something that is kind of masquerading as something else, often with the goal of getting your credit card information, getting financial information, getting login credentials like your username and password, or even when you click on a link, downloading something to your computer that's malicious, like some kind of spyware or tracking software. So those are things to watch out for as far as kind of messages and calls that you receive. Another thing that can happen is that you can run into pop-ups that look like these, that are warning you that something is wrong with your computer and you need to call this tech support number right now to get it fixed. Again, this usually shows up for Microsoft. Weirdly enough, there's also been a documented Netflix one. The same group was behind both of these, I think investigators figured out. And again, these are usually trying to get at your financial information. When you call, someone will act like a tech support person, and they'll tell you they need your financial information to verify your identity or get your account set up. So this is another way. It's not a message you receive, but it's a pop-up that appears on your computer and can be kind of alarming and encourage you to make a call to this bogus number. Yeah?
What would you do if you clicked on a website and your computer was automatically taken over by maybe a robot, or it was just taken over remotely taken over?
Remote control, yeah, that software exists. Remote control software, it's very easy to buy. So this is a thing that could happen.
What would you do, just turn your computer off?
I'd turn my computer off, yeah, and I would, I guess it depends on who's in your network. I would call kind of like a savvy friend or family member. Honestly, call a librarian, bring the computer into the library and have somebody look at it. Or, I mean, call EFF. We're very interested in seeing where malware pops up in different ways. And info@EFF.org is always fair game to contact if you run into something like that.
Would be a malware attack?
Probably. I mean, it's hard to know without seeing it, right? But that's maybe what it sounds like. It could also be, right, it's hard to tell sometimes. Maybe your computer's overloaded and it just shut down. And there was some kind of error.
If it was a remote control, you took over the computer and just started doing stuff.
Yeah, I think, I mean, consult someone with more knowledge than you, right? That's what I would do even, as a security expert. I would consult someone who knows more than me. And yeah, that could be a savvy friend or family member, that could be a librarian, that could be writing to an organization like EFF. Great. So the third and final category, which some might think is a stretch, is I honestly think fake news. This is, again, a case, depending on how we define fake news, but of someone on the internet trying to make you click on a link that is pretending to be something it's not. It might be pretending to be from a reputable journalistic organization when in fact it is from an advocacy group or a propaganda group. But where really the security bent is here, it's not just about the inaccurate information, which I think has gotten a lot of attention. There's been a big news cycle and a lot of headlines about fake news. These fake news websites, again, depending on how you define fake news, but a lot of times, if a website is trying to entice you to click on it with, sensational headlines and some really promising news that seems too good to be true, it can often also come with privacy invasive trackers, with tracking advertisements, and with more malicious links. There's a theory that I think has not been backed up necessarily with research, as this is kind of a new phenomenon, at least with the term of fake news. But the theory that I see is that fake news is saying, oh, if I could get you to click on this really fantastic, sensational story that doesn't seem to be true, I bet I can get you to click on a tech support scam, or I bet I can get you to click on a phishing link. So these sites that, again, are pretending to be something they're not, they can be just more dangerous places on the web in terms of shady trackers and advertisements. And again, it's because of the motivations of these sites. There's a motivation to get you to click on it for advertising money. There's often a motivation to collect user browsing information for third parties. And again, a motivation to find vulnerable users. So just the overall warning here is that fake news is not just about inaccurate information. It often comes with these much more concrete security and privacy threats. So with that kind of very quick overview of some things, common things to look out for, I'll talk about some steps you can take right now that I hope will answer some of the previous questions a little better. There's 6 steps, and I'll go through them relatively quickly. But again, please feel free to ask questions if anything's unclear. I'll also be available after and by email if we want to go into more detail. So the first thing I highly recommend is to look critically at the things you're encountering online. Look critically at messages you receive and at pop-ups you run into. And this is not a small deal. Like, security professionals get tricked by this stuff. Like, this is not for the faint of heart. I was talking recently to a family member, an older family member, who said, I would feel so stupid if I clicked on one of these things. But I told her, massive organizations get compromised by this, by employees clicking on stuff. This stuff is clever and to be taken very seriously. I have even gotten some stuff in my inbox that's made me look twice, and it's ended up being phishing. So this is not just for novices or people who don't know the internet. This is the most sophisticated hacking technique we have. So a few things to look for that tend to characterize all of these phishing scams, malware scams, tech support scams. First of all, strange URLs or sender addresses. Maybe the URL has like a lot of garbled numbers and letters in it that don't look quite right. Maybe it's missing a letter. It's from like Mazon.com rather than Amazon.com. And maybe it's a weird sender. It doesn't quite look like an official company address. It doesn't quite look like what I usually get from my bank. So just you can develop some spidey senses around those. Second, these are almost always unexpected or unsolicited. They're telling you you won something that you didn't apply for. You're hearing about fraud from your bank, and there's maybe no reason you know of that would be happening right now. And along with that, they come with urgency. Often things that you don't expect are very urgent. It's about fraud, or it's about your computer being infected. It's telling you to act now. And often that comes with threats. Act now or your account's going to be suspended. Act now or we're going to shut down your card. Click on this link now, or your computer's going to get even more infected. This kind of double punch of urgency and threats that can get past even the most tech-savvy and clever users. I remember getting a message from my bank maybe 5 years ago that said, like, there's fraud on your account, just put in your information and it'll all be fine. And to be completely honest with you, as a security expert up here, I totally did it. And then I realized it was a terrible idea. I called the bank and I canceled my card. But that combination of urgency and threats can really get you, especially when you're busy and you have a lot of stuff going on and it seems like, hey, I just put in my information and I've saved my bank card. That sounds fine. So watch out, particularly for those. Those are very common. The flip side of the threats is rewards. And we see this, I think, a little more often in text messages. This promise of, you just won money, you just won a free prize, you just won a huge gift card, and things that might seem too good to be true, or they might be with, I think there was a Best Buy scam that happened. Maybe you don't go to Best Buy often, and it seems weird that Best Buy is texting you with a prize that you never even applied for or entered for. Along with that, you can kind of get two sides of the same coin. You could see an unrecognized sender, someone you've never heard from before, a name you don't know, an institution you don't know. It just seems weird. Why would they be contacting you if you've never really interacted with them? The other side of that coin, it could be a large, known, trusted sender that would make you want to click on whatever they're sending you, like Google, Amazon, Facebook, any one of a number of banks that you may be banking with. There's a good chance you're banking with. And especially when you see those from large, known, trusted senders, that's when you have a chance to really defend yourself.
But how do you know that it's something to worry about?
Again, it's kind of just about taking a moment when you receive these kind of messages and trying to look at these things. Look at the URLs, look at the sender addresses, even look at the logos. Are they exactly like other stuff you've received? And does it just not feel quite right? Is this unexpected? Is it from something you don't usually interact with?
Does the danger come when you immediately click on it?
Yes, you would have to click on something. Like just opening an email probably will not harm you.
What about this hovering over the URL business?
Yeah, that's also a great idea. That's a great way to see if a link is pretending to be something it's not. If you hover over the URL and it looks drastically different. If the text says you're going to amazon.com/user-login, when in fact you're going to a very weird URL you've never seen before and don't recognize. But there's no foolproof way. There's no foolproof way to know, and they're getting cleverer and cleverer every day. And that's kind of, yeah.
Cleverer and cleverer. I've gotten stuff addressed to my email address, and I think even with my name, coming from supposedly somebody I know.
Yeah, that also happens, yeah.
I'm in London, I got in some trouble here, and Peter, would you please send me whatever, $550.
Yeah.
I need this money and I'll give it back to you as soon as I get back.
That's another common one, yeah.
And the only thing that looks fishy initially is if it's somebody I know who has more of a calm head on his or her shoulders, then the urgency.
Sending you this urgent letter,
the tone
yeah.
is a little off.
Yeah.
There's something a little peculiar. And then if I look closely at the sender,
Yeah, exactly.
isn't quite right. So then I will send something to the person that I actually know with the email address that I actually know, and I say, are you sending this stuff out? And of course it's happened a number of times, and they say, I have no idea, no, I'm not here in San Francisco still.
Yeah, and that is a really good transition to the next point. If you're ever not sure, verify. Verify, 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 verify in several ways. So what you just described is perfect. I got something weird from this email address. I'm going to use a different one that I know is real, and I'm going to go straight to the source. Another way is, like, let's say you get an email from a friend, try calling them, or texting them, or going to them in person. Use something other than this message that seems fishy, and go straight to the source directly. You can do the same thing with banks, for example. Use the number that you have for your bank on the back of your card and call them and say, hey, is there really a fraud alert on my account? Is this really a message I would ever receive from this bank? You can do the same thing. If Amazon and Google contact you, you can contact their customer support, and they are very aware of these kind of scams and say, like, hey, is this a thing I would actually receive? And often the answer will be no. Yeah.
If you receive a message from a big company like wellsfargo.com or paypal.com,
Yeah.
could it still be bogus even if everything is spelled correctly?
Yeah. I mean, it is not easy, but we have the technology to spoof email addresses. And I think there's really no harm other than maybe, taking 5 minutes of your time to go straight to the source through another way that you know is legit, like a phone number that you have, typing in their website in your address bar to go straight to them, and just verify. It's worth it. It's worth the small amount of time it will take. Even I've heard some people say, let's say I got a weird message from Wells Fargo. They might go to Google and Google Wells Fargo email scam. Often the companies will already be on top of it, and they might even have a statement out that says, hey, if you get a message that sounds like this, know that it's not real. So sometimes, depending on what the message is and whether the company's heard of it already, you won't even have to contact someone. The information might already be out there. But I think you never have anything to lose by verifying. If something seems weird, you should trust your gut there. And why risk it when all it really takes is 5 or 10 minutes? In addition to going to the source directly, I'm a huge fan of just having another pair of eyes on it. Especially, like I said, someone with maybe more expertise or knowledge than you, a tech-savvy friend or family member. Bring it into the library, just show it to a librarian. Just the value of having another set of eyes to maybe confirm, like, yeah, that does look weird. Or yeah, I have heard about this. Or maybe they'll even spot something else you might not have seen that also confirms that this is a little fishy. I think the thing about these messages, they encourage you to not think and to rush and to react. And the more and more you can step back and say, I'm going to take 5 minutes to verify, I'm going to show this to my friend, that's your defense. And when you don't play into those calls for urgency or the threats that they're making, that is, I think, always reasonable, and you have very little to lose. And if anything, you'll learn about what might be reasonable or not to receive from a certain person, or learn what things to look out for. Any more questions on that? Excellent.
The biggies often don't have any way easily to reach them, either by email or by telephone.
Yeah,
You
sure.
try and find out, how to get in touch with Yahoo or Google. As far as I'm concerned, forget it. You better go to the library and
Yeah, of
get
course.
a detailed reference book to find out how to get in touch with them. They're not going to give it to you online.
Sure. Well, I mean, and often when scams are going around, they will have dedicated pages kind of telling you what you would hear from them and what you would not hear from them. For example, Microsoft will never ask you to call them through a pop-up. They just won't. And that is documented online on a Microsoft website. So you can often find this information without having to contact someone. And if that ever fails, again, talk to someone else with more expertise than you do. And if you use one of those things, you will probably come to like a higher level of certainty and make a safe and secure decision. Yeah.
What do you do with an email that you suspect is not right?
Delete it.
Just delete
Yeah,
it?
just delete it.
You don't report it to someone and have them follow up somehow? Is there any way to do that?
Not necessarily. I think the best thing for you personally is just delete it. Just ignore it. Yeah. Did I see another question over here?
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So you're in the organization you belong to. Your role is the researcher.
Yeah, yeah.
So you research internet protection, or how to protect yourself on the internet and all that stuff.
Yeah, kind of like broadly consumer privacy and security, which
Well,
can encompass a lot of
exactly. What
things.
tools do you use as far as research, as far as researching online? I mean, you just use different web browsers or different, well, I mean, I guess you use Google, Firefox.
I'll go into that a little next, actually. That's on the next slide. Yeah. Yeah, so perfect question. Do I see more over here before we move on?
I just want to add something. A couple of years ago, they sent me a Gmail.
Mm-hmm.
They sent me that I won. They got my email address, and I'm selected to win $2,500,000. And I was I did open that. I did read it. They were asking me my address, my name, my days, my birth date, and all that. So I didn't do any of that. What I did, I just contacted Gmail, and they told me to be very cautious. There's nothing I can do about it, but be careful from opening these emails.
Yeah, I think especially in Gmail, opening an email will not hurt you. Gmail's got the best security team on earth. It won't hurt you. But
With
clicking.
duplicate of their Gmail.
Yeah, it can look very convincing. Yeah,
Yes,
but I think I wouldn't be afraid of opening emails, but then clicking on things in those emails is where it starts to get dicey. So just keep that in mind. You can open emails in your inbox, and that's fine. But clicking on links and clicking on attachments, that's where it can start to be a thing you don't want to do.
They still have those malwares where they send you an attachment, you open it, and all of a sudden it's for your whole computer.
I think that's a thing that can happen. I wouldn't expect to receive that because I don't know what kind of a random spammer out there, what benefit they could gain from destroying my computer. Usually they want information from you. They want some kind of financial or login information, but that is technology that exists. Just not something I would expect to see necessarily, yeah.
I just read that North Korea had hacked into the Vietnamese bank and some other banks and stole millions of dollars. So,
Quite possibly.
it's like, wow, how did they get away with that?
Quite possibly, but unless any of us run a Vietnamese bank, we should be fine as far as that. So just looking at the time to keep moving on, the next general tip that can apply to most people in this room is securing your browser. Again, like I said, just in the same way that opening an email probably won't hurt you because Gmail's got great security, it can help to use browsers that have built-in security and privacy protections. Mozilla Firefox and Google Chrome are two of those browsers that I highly recommend. They've done a lot of the work for you. And then on top of that, there's two extensions that I think can be good for pretty much any internet user. They're both developed by EFF. They're free and open source. You can download them for no cost. They're called Privacy Badger and HTTPS Everywhere. These will be extensions to your browser that kind of become a part of your browser. And they'll do two things. Privacy Badger will kind of sniff out third-party trackers that appear to be following you around the internet. And those third-party trackers, they're called third parties because they're not the website you're trying to visit. They're probably not a website you've ever heard of, but they're dropping what's called cookies on you and tracking your browsing activity across the net. That could be to build advertising profiles, to get more browsing information. Whatever it is generally privacy invasive and just not a great thing. It's often invisible, you don't even know about it, but it's a thing to discourage. So Privacy Badger will block those. It'll show you exactly what it's blocking. So it's kind of a cool educational tool to go to different websites and see what Privacy Badger is finding. You know, how many third-party trackers is it finding and what are they? Where are they showing up? That can be really interesting and good for your security.
Is that an app that we can download? Is that what
Yeah, it's an extension. So it's just Google Privacy Badger and you can download it for whatever browser you're using.
So this will work on the Chromebook, okay?
Yeah, that'll work on Google Chrome, the browser. Yeah, absolutely. And then HTTPS Everywhere is another extension. What this does is it encrypts your browsing connection wherever possible. And a brief explanation behind that. There's two ways for a web page to get to you. One is called HTTP, which stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It's just the language of the internet. And one is called HTTPS, and the S stands for secure. HTTP, just plain old HTTP, is vulnerable to eavesdropping on an open Wi-Fi network. It's open to content hijacking, someone kind of getting in the middle of your session and serving you things that you didn't ask for. When you secure it and use HTTPS and encrypt it, someone looking on the outside on an open Wi-Fi network or any kind of surveillance can no longer see the details of what you're browsing. It's increasingly just kind of best practice for the web. And as more and more websites are migrating to it, I think right now we have 50% of all internet traffic using HTTPS, the secure kind. Sometimes there are websites that have migrated incompletely, or they have HTTPS, but it's not there by default. What HTTPS Everywhere will do is it'll scoop up that encryption that might slip through the cracks. And it will just make sure that wherever HTTPS is possible, your browser will be using it. So it's just another kind of small, maybe even seemingly invisible way to a lot of users to make your browsing a little bit more secure. All it costs you is a click, and it doesn't kind of interfere with your speed or anything on your browser. It is generally a great thing to do. So next tip after securing your browser is using strong passphrases. And I use passphrase rather than password to convey that they should be long. They should have to be more than one word. They should be phrases. Number one, whatever you do, just don't use the same password for every login. I know it's tempting, or you might use the same password with a 1 at the end or a period at the end when different sites ask for different things. Don't do it, because if there's a password leak or if in some way you lose one of your passwords, if it was the same for every site, now you've lost all your passwords. And that's just not what we want. So there's a couple strategies you can use to make different passwords. You can use different random password generators to just make big, long, random passwords that use numbers and letters and punctuation and special characters. You can also use a thing called diceware. If you just Google that word diceware, you'll find instructions that helps you put together passwords that are just several random, uncommon words. Those can often be easier to remember if you want. Much easier to remember 4 weird words than to remember a jumble of numbers and letters. Whatever you choose to do, however you choose to create your different passwords for every site and login, a password manager can really help, because then you don't have to memorize all of them. You can just remember one to access your password manager, and then you have the rest.
What is diceware?
So diceware, I was mentioning, that's one method to help you create a password using several completely random words.
You mean just make up a password which has a bunch of simple different words?
And I encourage you to go Google diceware. There's detailed descriptions and lists online. The idea is that you use actual dice to roll out a bunch of numbers using a list of random, uncommon words. You correspond those numbers to the words in the list, and then you get a truly random password that has nothing to do with you or your interests or words you would commonly look for. And it's kind of fun if that's something you would like to do. But diceware is increasingly kind of a best practice because it's both random and relatively easy to remember.
You said it was a site where you can manage these passwords, so that would delete them all.
Yeah, so the next point was that however you decide to do this, a password manager is a great way to make sure you don't have to remember them all. And these are some popular ones that are all free. LastPass, I use KeePassX. Dashlane is another one. There's endless articles online about different password managers and what features they have, and there's some you can pay money for if you want. There's a lot of options, but I think it's just good to use one, again, because then it makes it feasible to make all these lovely random passwords for every single site.
So you would clock into it like you do into your email?
Yeah, it would be another account that you sign into. And for example, LastPass, that's their name because they're saying it's the last password you'll ever have to memorize. Instead of having to memorize 30 for all of your different websites and logins, you just remember one for your password manager.
But how does the password that they generate get loaded into the site that you're trying to open? Like you're trying to open your bank's website.
Yeah, so it depends on the password manager. For some of them, you just copy paste. You open the password manager, copy paste the password over. Some will be connected to your browser, so then your browser will automatically fill it in. Each password manager offers like slightly different features. Chrome, Google Chrome, the browser itself is a password manager sometimes. It offers to remember passwords for you. So that can also kind of be a password manager of sorts.
Is that a good thing though? I always say no to that.
You know, it depends, and that's back to threat model. If you're worried about someone stealing your computer and logging in and using the internet as you, then maybe you don't want to do that. If you're more worried about, I have this tendency to use the same password and I don't have a good way to manage it, then maybe it's nice to let Chrome management for you.
I use public computers all the time. Is that a good idea?
Oh, yeah, they should definitely not remember it for you. And I think at the library, the public computers should just refresh after every session. Yeah, so then absolutely, you can use password managers that you can upload to the cloud, so you can have them on Dropbox or Google Drive, so you could use them at the different computers you use. The password manager could move with you. That is a really nice feature sometimes. I use that for like different devices and computers.
Which one was that the KeePass one?
I think KeePassX will definitely do that. I think the others will too, because the password manager is really just a file. Your computer recognizes it at a file that you could store on the cloud and use anywhere.
So how do you know how secure they're keeping your passwords?
Indeed, yeah, that is that. Again, no perfect security. That is one of the compromises. LastPass got hacked a while ago. They had their own password leak. Nothing is perfect. It's just a matter of, again, what are the compromises I'm willing to use? If I didn't use a password manager, would I be writing them down on paper? And is that better for me or not? I think for a lot of people, particularly for me with like things related to employment, I absolutely cannot write them down on paper, so I use a password manager. I know, yep.
I guess you could kind of make your own password manager if you used a thumb drive and create a bunch of passwords to it, and then put a password lock on the thumb.
Yeah, I would just say that it could be disastrous if you lose that thumb drive.
Yeah.
So again, you have to, but maybe that's an okay trade-off for you. Maybe it's worth it for that level of security. All of these are always going to be trade-offs, and it's just a matter of the trade-offs that make sense for you. And again, I mean, LinkedIn had a password leak. Nothing we use online is perfectly secure, and you cannot be sure how secure it is. And this is something we accept. Again, door lock security. Someone could hack through my door if they wanted to, and I had a sharp axe. But I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen. I'm pretty sure in the thickness of my door, and I accept this risk. So it's a lot about what risk are you willing to accept, what makes sense for you. Anything else on this? Excellent. Next thing I wanted to go over is to use a thing called two-factor authentication. Another phrase I'll try to get into here, but that is great to Google. There's more information about this in that SSD surveillance self-defense guide I mentioned, ssd.eff.org. But to give you a quick introduction, we just talked about passwords. Those are your lock to get into your online accounts. But they're only one thing. So then, like you said, if my password manager company is hacked, or if my favorite social network has a password leak, then what? Now my password's out there. Two-factor authentication makes it so that you use two things to log in. So if your password is compromised, you can still be fine. And the idea here is that it's using two factors to log in. So usually we just use a password. That is one factor, and it is something that I know is the factor. It is a password that I know, and presumably only I know, and that's how I get in. With two-factor authentication, you use something you know, the password, as well as something you have, which tends to be a code that is sent to your cell phone. And I encourage people to think about, this is the same idea as an ATM. When I go to an ATM, I have my card, something I have, and I have my PIN number, something I know. I don't just use my card because someone could steal my card. But that PIN number, that second factor, ensures that if someone stole my card, it will be a little harder for them to go use it at an ATM. It's the same idea here with two-factor authentication. If someone stole your password, now it's going to be a little harder for them to get into your accounts. You might have seen when I was even logging in earlier before the session, I had to go through a two-factor authentication process to get into my Google Drive. So I put in my login information, I put in my password, and then it says, hey, we just texted you a code. We texted a code to your cell phone, which presumably only I have. And then I put that code in, and then it lets me in. So two-factor authentication, it can work with a text to your cell phone. It can work with an app that is generating random codes. It can work with, for some banks, you have what they call a security token, or you can get something called a YubiKey to plug in. That's something you have to show that you are you. So again, it's just something to make it a little harder to hack your account if your password gets stolen. I know this is a really quick explanation, but I promise it'll make more sense if you go read about it online and check out how it works for the different accounts you use. And one of the warnings is that, to make it extra confusing, most sites call it different things. Twitter calls it login verification and login requests. Facebook calls it login approvals. Google calls it two-step verification rather than two-factor authentication. They're all the same thing. They're all the idea of you put in your password and then it asks you for one more thing to prove that you're you before you get into your account. If you go to the website twofactorauth.org, they have the most comprehensive list I know of online of the different sites that offer this, that offer two-factor authentication, and how they do it. And it often gives you a link to a tutorial to set it up on the website. So this is like a little bit of a weekend project to figure out what online accounts you even use regularly, to go to twofactorauth.org and see if and how they're supported and to set it up. But once you set it up, it's seamless. And then every time you log in, all you have to do is just get a text or get a code from your phone and type it in, and then you're in. So it's another kind of small investment of time for a very good common sense security precaution, particularly when we just kind of talked about how strong passwords can be, but again, how vulnerable they can be to being leaked. So I know that is a relatively quick introduction, but if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them.
What if you don't have a cell phone?
Yeah, there's other methods. A YubiKey can be good, but again, like kind of cumbersome and easy to lose. Again, this is not a necessary thing you have to do. It's just another layer of protection you can add if you wish. But unfortunately, two-factor auth does often require a cell phone, which is one of its biggest criticisms. So you're not alone. There's a lot of two-factor auth gets a lot of heat for requiring that. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I knew that LinkedIn, was hacked, but I didn't hear much about what happened after.
Honestly, afterwards they published a blog post saying, "Hey everyone, turn on two-factor authentication." So that's a great question. Change your passwords and turn on two-factor authentication, because then if you have two-factor authentication, it doesn't really matter if the password got leaked. People can't get in.
But your information has already been compromised, and that's who they want to sell it. A lot of the
Sure,
even with
yeah.
the target,
Yeah.
search term appearing online.
That is the danger anywhere. Yeah. But I think as far as protecting yourself, strong passwords are good. Changing those passwords every once in a while is also good so they don't get stale. And if you can, using two-factor authentication to just add another layer on top of that password.
So your username is considered part of the two-factor authentication, or is that, or are you using two different passwords to get into?
It's kind of like, it's more like two different passwords. Yeah. The two things we're focusing on are the password and the two-factor authentication code that you get.
Oh, so normally a username is not considered part of a two-factor authentication?
Not really, yeah. That's just your identification, I guess, if we had to give it a term. Yeah. You need to know it. That would be helpful to get in. But this is about if someone were to know both your username and your password, then they wouldn't be able to get in because they don't have your cell phone or the thing that you're getting codes from. You can also actually, to answer the question about not having a cell phone, you can use backup codes. And I think these are less supported. I'm pretty sure everything pictured here supports it, and twofactorauth.org would tell you if they do. Instead of having codes texted to your phone every time you log in, they give you a printed out list of 10 to 12 codes you can type in, and you can use that printout to get into your account. I've used that when I'm traveling sometimes and can't receive text messages or don't have my phone. So the printed out backup codes are also an option if you want to use that.
All the time then? While you're traveling, all the same codes? Or you have to get new ones?
You have to get new ones. They're each single use, but you can go onto the website and just download them and print them out.
But
So
they only last for what, 24 hours or?
it's gonna depend on the website, and they would tell you when they produce them. But I think often for the printed out codes, they last until you use them. Often, it totally depends on the website. For the things that are texted to you, those can expire in hours, or even minutes, depending on what you're using. But they'll usually tell you very clearly if it's going to expire. You'll be able to read that when you receive the codes. So yeah, if you don't have a phone, those printed out backup codes can be an option. A little cumbersome, but maybe that's worth it, depending on how you're looking at it. Yeah.
So in the category of what do I want to protect, I noted that you left out searches.
Yeah, browsing habits and searches, yeah.
And I'm not sure that you had it on your list. So do you have any, I guess DuckDuckGo comes to mind.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have any other thoughts about not letting searches?
Not searching for the wrong thing, is that what you mean?
I think it's more about protecting your searching history, just if that's information you'd like to keep private, which makes sense. It's kind of the contents of your mind often. DuckDuckGo is a search engine that makes a pledge to not log your searches anywhere. So there's no record created of them. Law enforcement could not go serve a subpoena to access them. They disappear into the ether after you search them. DuckDuckGo is great. I use DuckDuckGo by default. I know for a lot of people, there's some resistance to using DuckDuckGo just because it's not as good a search engine. One of the reasons Google is such a great search engine is because it knows you very well and it knows what you search for. For a lot of people, the price of handing over your searches is worth it for the outstanding service of Google Search. For others, it's not. So DuckDuckGo is a great option.
Okay, and the other thing I wanted to say is that partly you're telling us how to swim safely where there are sharks.
Sure.
So one option is not to swim where there are sharks at all, which is to stay offline altogether and do it some other way. And the other thing is, I think there are some, like Google searches, like Facebook, the whole business model is to gather information as much as they can on every single thing that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is something to be aware of. You're not paying, but you're paying with your privacy.
Yeah, of course.
When you're on some of these sites.
Yeah, that is definitely a dominant business model of the internet. For some people, that is an acceptable compromise. For others, it's not at all. And I think it's important, more and more, it's just not an option to not do something online. For employment, for your job, for staying in touch with people in your life, it's just not an option. So for me, it's much, much more important to find ways to swim safely rather than to not swim at all, just because increasingly that's just not feasible for a lot of people. And I'd much rather advocate for law and policy changes, for better tools, for better habits, than for just throwing it away altogether. There's often alternatives, but I think for a lot of people, that's harder to do. So I want to find ways for people to feel comfortable and safe on the internet using things that will not take a lot of expertise or time or resources. So just for time, I'm going to maybe rush through these last ones a little bit. This next tip, our second to last one, so we're close to done, is to keep your account recovery options up to date. So again, we're talking a lot about passwords, what happens when they're compromised, how you can protect against it. Account recovery options mean that if you forget your password, if maybe it's changed, if someone gets into your account and changes your password, if for whatever reason you can't access your account, having other ways for the company or website to contact you so you can get back in. And again, this could just be as simple as forgetting your password, losing your password manager, something like that. A lot of websites will accept a recovery email, an alternative email for you, a phone number they can call or text you at, or a secret question that perhaps only you would know the answer to. Always, again, to establish your identity that might not include having your password. And often these can go out of date really fast. We change phone numbers, we get new email addresses, and this is a step we often forget. Again, this is kind of another weekend project, just kind of go over my recovery settings this weekend, set up a password manager this weekend. But doing this periodically is worth it because there's nothing worse than losing access to your account and realizing that you didn't keep these up to date and that the only thing that the website can now email is your old email you don't use anymore. So relatively easy thing to do that can pay off in the future if you need it. And then the last thing I wanted to share is to keep your software updated. This is software for your device operating system, for different things you might use on your device. Keeping your software updated is one of the single, biggest bang for your buck things you can do to protect yourself from kind of large-scale threats out there. And this is because, like I said, there is no such thing as perfect security. All of the software you are using right now, I guarantee it has what we call bugs or exploits in it that make it vulnerable to outside hacks or attacks. That is just the nature of software. It is made by humans. It can be compromised by humans. When companies learn about these bugs, which they're constantly doing, they'll release an update to the software to fix the security bug, the security problem. When you run that update, you too have fixed the security bug, you can go on your way. But until you've run it, you are vulnerable to whatever this new bug is that we know about. So I always encourage people, I know it's a pain, but when you get a little security pop-up saying, it's time to update your operating system, take the time, restart your computer if you have to, even though that can be very annoying, and run the update. There are a lot of people working very hard to patch the software you're using, and you can't benefit from that unless you run the updates whenever they come through. So that is another just kind of common sense. All you have to do is click and take a few minutes of your time, and you get a lot more security out of that.
I've been afraid to click on that, sometimes thinking that that would somehow be malware. Is it always okay to click on it?
Sure. I think it's interesting. The security advice here has changed over the years. We used to say oh, maybe don't click on it, maybe see. It could be malware. In my professional opinion, it's probably not. And again, if you're concerned, if it just seems weird, if it seems a little too flashy, if the grammar seems weird or it's a pop-up, again, show it to someone else.
Yes.
And they'll be able to help you determine whether or not it's real. But often, they're going to look exactly the same each time. They're going to be pretty nondescript, relatively small. They're going to come from, the app store, the software manager of your computer. I'm a MacBook user, so I know that the best. Linux also has kind of a software manager. So it won't be from a weird website or anything. It'll be from kind of part of your operating system, part of the computer itself. So there's different ways to see. And if you tell me more about the device you're using, afterwards I could tell you a little more about what to look for. You can also Google what to look for. And I've done that with people before, hey, what does an update from a MacBook look like?
Yes.
What would it reasonably look like, to kind of help yourself start to see what are the things that I could reasonably see and think, oh, okay, this is legitimate. Yeah, I think like anything else, I've just spent 20 minutes telling you don't click on things without thinking first, and now I'm telling you to click on these things. But these are more often safe, and we're less and less seeing hacks come through this. This would require kind of getting access to your device in a much more sophisticated way. We're seeing hacks coming through the web, through your browser, through pop-ups, through messages, through texts. Those are going to be much more common. But again, if you get a software update thing and a pop-up that's a browser with the URL, that's not right. This should be from your operating system within the computer.
Coming off of the tray on the bottom?
I mean, if it's a web page. If it's a web page with a URL,
Yes.
That's not right.
Okay.
It probably should be coming up off the tray on the bottom, yeah.
Okay.
Typically, if I know what you're talking about. But this is one thing where often it's going to make sense to click on it. Again, if you're not sure, show it to a tech-savvy friend or family member. Google, hey, what should this look like? Before you click on it, show it to a librarian. But this is something that in general you're going to want to do. It's good to keep your software updated. With that is the last thing I wanted to tell you about. Just for review, we went over a short introduction to threat modeling and risk assessment, talked about a few things, common things to look out for online, and talked about some steps you could take right now. And with that, I'm happy to take any final questions or talk more after, and you can get in touch with me through email or phone, or go to EFF.org for more information there. Yeah, I'll keep this up here, definitely. That'll stay there. And if you have any questions now, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, happy to follow up later.